Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the show. One of, if not my favorite guest of all time, Jeff Lester's on the show. Jeff, welcome back, my friend.
Hey, brother, it's so good to be back here.
Yeah, you know what yes, great to have you back. I'd say we're in double digits for hours of content that you and I have podcasted over the years. You know, the first series of 8 that we did, that's about 8 hours there, and we've done a few since then. So I'm thinking we're past the 10 hours of podcasting content, which is tremendous.
Easily,
Yeah,
easily. And it's a journey each and every time.
it is. It is. And you know what? We basically just literally just came in here and pressed start, and we're not exactly sure what we're going to talk about. And that's cool. I'm liking that.
I'm cool. I'm cool with that too, brother. We were just talking about the powerful healing force that is nature
Mm,
and the potential to get ourselves in a really good place, literally, physically being in a good place
yeah.
in nature, and also the mental, emotional benefits that come from that.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah, I love that. You know, and so we're talking about I've recently relocated to the Lower Mainland, West Coast Canada, so around Vancouver, and just surrounded by these massive, I'm looking in my backyard. We have 3 cedar trees that are well over 100 feet tall. My brother, who is a tree planter, so some authority on this, ventured to guess they're about 150 years old each. So, and they have
Wow.
that cool vibe to them. I go and ground on them every morning and touch them and just, yeah, it's that type of thing, right? It's like you mentioned it, it puts me in a completely different frame of mind and one of very much of growth and abundance and gratitude as soon as I get out into the nature that's around me, which is so crucial, in contrast to, what has essentially become a desk job with the online coaching, which again I'm very grateful for. But sometimes I can get into, you know what I mean? I can get into that, seated position for a little too long, go down the rabbit hole in my mind of a few different things, and the best way for me to break that pattern is just get out into nature and just feel myself recalibrate, come to life, grow, expand, and start focusing on exactly that. You know, the phrase that what is it? You can't be anxious in a spot where gratitude is existing, or something along those lines. Like, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So definitely feeling that. Yeah, great topic, great topic. And how about yourself? Because you have been in Portugal for a couple of years, or not
Couple
quite.
of years
Couple
now.
of years now.
Yeah.
Wow, yeah, that went by quick, eh?
Yeah, tell me about it.
Holy.
Yeah. Well, I've always felt, at least since I last lived in a place, which was London in the United Kingdom, big, massive city with
Yes.
an electric energy. And when I left London, I was hesitant. I really wanted to stay. My visa expired and life was taking me in another direction. And over the years, this was in 2016, and over the years, as I continue to deepen my personal practices, and that includes taking care of my like self-care, eating well, moving my body, and gradually becoming more sensitive and attuned to the needs and what feels good for me. And believe me, that's been a journey in of itself. The more that I've gravitated towards natural places. And so when I visit a place now, and I'm still traveling, I'm still teaching yoga trainings in various locations. I go for the nature. I go for it's nature first. I want to visit the land and then maybe some culture, maybe then connect with the other things about that. But I go visit the land and places. And I was in a place in 2020 where I came back to the state and was very much in this exploration and an intuitive exploration around where do I want to live, because I am have been this vagabond yoga teacher for years, and I've had the luxury of going to the amazing beautiful places around the world. And well, we got introduced to lockdowns, and there was this period of time where I wasn't sure if I was ever going to get back to Europe and or the UK, places that really call my soul. And well, eventually that shifted, thank goodness. And one of the places I intended to visit, just because it was beeping louder and flashing brighter on my radar, was Portugal.
Mm,
And I just went to visit. I set myself up with a day retreat at a friend's venue. So I had some friends there. I rented the venue and did a cacao ceremony with breath work, and it was awesome. And a- as soon as I got there, honestly, so many synchronicities started to happen. And this is how I recognize there's unseen forces in action. And this is really what I mean. I just to do a little tangent, synchronicities are all about unseen forces at work. And there's, only so much we can perceive and what we consider reality. And that's just the tip of the iceberg of our existential experience. And it's when we start seeing these little synchronicities, maybe it's the angel numbers, or maybe it's running into that person, or maybe you get this. For me, it's a yes energy, especially when I'm in a place where I'm seeking, where I'm open to, receptive to possibilities. And so Portugal wasn't on my radar to go live there, but I definitely
mm,
wanted to go visit. And then
right.
lo and behold, I get there and I'm meeting these people, and they're, of course, Portugal's this wonderful, uh, they call it the California of Europe in terms of
Oh, okay.
well, one, it's on the West Coast, and two, it's beautiful. Like
Hmm.
it's very natural and not so heavily populated outside the main cities. And it just was beautiful. And I start considering the possibility of living here. And oh, I meet a person who's from the United States and has gotten the visa to live here. Oh, it happens to be at the time one of the easier places. They had a very progressive uh, setup, the government did, for people coming in and getting a residency permit, which was unheard of. It's so funny the things that come into consciousness
Right.
that come to pass when the time is right. So that's
Hmm.
another little tangent, is
Hmm.
letting ourselves honor a sacred timing versus what our ego and mind thinks is
Mm.
the right time, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And yeah, that was 2021, 22. And at the end of 22, I said, all right, let's do this. I've done my paperwork. I'm gonna get my residency permit, cross the fingers that it goes
Yeah.
through, because there is the Portuguese government aspect of it. And it's very different than
Sure.
being, you know, on time, and it's more lackadaisical. Well, to put it in a word, for me, it takes its own time.
Mm, hmm.
And it was so, it's just the land, man. I ended up I'm in a cabin. I'm
Awesome.
8 minutes from the coast
Man,
and a few minutes from beautiful forest. So
man.
like I said, I go visit the land, and
Hmm.
everything else is secondary. And if I go
Yeah.
into a city, I'm looking for a park first thing.
Right. Not interesting. Yeah. I love that, man. Yeah, there's a lot of parallels, to the reasons that we came down here and a lot of things that resonate for what you were saying. I actually like to share it too. I'm wondering how much of this has surfaced for you over the years, specific to all your traveling, and I'll share it. So Darcy, my wife, and I are from British Columbia. So we were living in Edmonton, Alberta, northern Alberta, for the past 20 plus years. With the guys, we were always wanting to come home. So to British Columbia, it's a lot just like similar where you say it's very much like the California of Canada, right? The West Coast and lots of nature and all that too. So a lot of parallels that way. And the thing was, we loved the Lower Mainland, that being Vancouver area here, but there was a story attached to it. It was like this, it's like a place that you visit. It's not for you. It's too expensive. These stories, right? And this is like all my life, and dates back, Jeff, to my parents are from here. My grandparents are from Vancouver, right? And my parents born and raised Vancouver, and they actually moved away. The story is, it started as early before I was even born. The story started that it was too expensive because my mom and dad decided to leave North Vancouver to start the family. I have an older brother, so he wasn't even conceived of yet. So 2 years before my brother was even born, they had left Vancouver to Prince George, a very more affordable, it's like central northern BC, we'll call it. So about 8 hours away. And then we were born and raised there with the whole history of like, oh, Vancouver is beautiful, but not for, you know what I mean? Not for people like us, sort of vibe to it, right?
Interesting story. Yeah.
Yeah. So I had that my entire childhood into my adult life. And my brother relocated there in 2009 and did very well. And he's done very well. He's still here. And for whatever reason, it was just that was constantly, even when I'd come and visit, I felt like an outsider for whatever reason. And this is just, I think, not for whatever reason. I think it's the conditioning and the story that I had put some weight into. And it was actually last year, almost a year to the date, I think it was around May of last year, that we came specifically to where we are, Maple Ridge. And it was the first time that I saw it through like a different filter where I was like, instead of going downtown Vancouver where there's all that, like you mentioned, I think closer to like like a London, a very electric atmosphere. Yes, there's still the ocean and nature and such, but very like sensory overload, tall
Yeah.
skyscrapers, all that sort of thing, and very, very white collar, which made me feel out of place. And I still do to a degree. But with Maple Ridge, where we are, I just saw like, I guess we'd say like just ordinary, normal families. I'm like, okay, hold on a second. Like it started to change the story for me, and then realizing, okay, not all traffic is bumper to bumper traffic all the time. This actually feels this feels familiar, right? And getting into that and accepting that there's a possibility that yes, we can definitely come down here. And then final point for this whole story thing is like everybody leading into us moving down here was, if I were to listen to the stories, if we were listening to the stories, is like it's very hard to find a place down there. You're not going to find a house for under $1 million. Real estate is a challenge. It's even the realtors are very impatient. If you don't know what you're wanting or looking for, they're gonna all these different stories, right? And for whatever reason, when you're talking about synchronicities and such, again, what we were talking about last night you helped facilitate a group call with me. You get what you focus on, right? So I very much put my focus on, as did Darcy, what we wanted and the outcome that we wanted, and really de-emphasized all the external noise and stories, and changed my story enough. It pivoted, or was at least open to a different outcome of this isn't for me, like it's too expensive, yada yada. And lo and behold, we found a house for 825, which is pretty unheard of. Like even in Maple Ridge, they're $1 million or more. So 825 in our price range, we were able to get that a house, not even a townhouse. So, and it was one of these, yeah, just I could go into granular detail about it. There was a lot of just things that lined up one after another, after another, after another, which I very much believe is not only synchronicity, but me staying the course and focusing on something and not distorting it with other external, perhaps expectations and such. So yeah. And the outcome now, man, is like, and I was just thinking about this morning, actually, I don't feel squeezed anymore. Yes, my living expenses have gone up, but it's not really registering with me, if that makes sense. Like everybody's like, well, you're going to have like a financial shock, or like living expenses shock, because it's double or triple, it's almost triple of what it was in Edmonton. And it's okay, well, logically that does make sense. And strangely enough, I'm not really feeling that. And I'm not sure if that's just because everything else is so in balance, or I was expecting it to, again, it's all about expectations, right? Was I expecting it to feel a different way? I don't feel like I'm getting, my heels are getting nipped at, or like I got to get a second job. It's really strange. I guess it really comes down to like, again, the story that I'm telling myself, the perception is reality in a lot of ways, right? So that's been our experience so far. And again, that's why it's so important for me to find that balance by getting back out into the environment, into nature, and just feeling very welcomed by the city, literally the forest of the city. I feel very welcomed which is not lost on me. Like I was telling you before we started recording, putting my hands on the trees and like saying thank you, and just feeling that vibe. And yeah, it's been quite the experience these last few months, I'll tell you.
There is a lot about that really it's resonating. And the first thing is we talk about story work, and we're both trained as story work coaches to be able to recognize when a conditioned belief system is influencing our perception of what's possible. And the greatest way to rewrite the story, even beyond putting pen to paper and going through a process, which is the second greatest way, the greatest way is to be open to, and maybe we get there by taking pen to paper and reworking it. The greatest way is being open to having a different experience.
Mm. Mhm.
And so traveling, the inevitability of a different experience in a different culture has been a huge hallmark for me because I grew up in Georgia in the Southeast United States, where there's this like closed mind and a lot of judgment and stories about other places, about American superiority in the world and American um, way of life, and how living a certain way might be diminished, et cetera, or the classic, if you've been watching the news, it's dangerous over there, be careful over there. And I completely unraveled. I mean, it's laughable when somebody who hasn't been to a place wants to tell me about a place and their opinion of a place, point by point by point, and the places I've been able to visit and explore and the people I've been able to meet, experientially has taught me something different. So now I do recognize that feeling that you're about the cost of living,
Mm.
because that's part of that story. You're like, huh. You're looking around like, huh, this feels different than I thought it might be. I mean, I allowed myself to process this experience outside the lens of it's too expensive or I'll be busting my ass to just keep my head above water. It's more like, let's do what we need to do. And there's a lot of space in that.
Mm.
And I want to come back to that nature piece because that's also pulling a thread about the trees and about the connection with nature. In all of the different modalities and esoteric sciences, if you will, spiritual sciences, from East Asia, Chinese medicine to the yogic philosophy of spiritual realization, actualization, to the shamanic practices, and animism. And animism is this understanding that everything, it's not even an understanding, it's a way of being in communion with all things, and all things are alive and everything has a consciousness, even if we consider it inanimate. And it's interesting because in our language, in English, there's a lot of inanimateness, if that's a word.
Yeah.
So there's a lot, there's a lot of things that are just inert, and there's no place for them to have a
Mm.
consciousness.
Mhm.
And if you look at the languages from indigenous peoples, or even Sanskrit, ancient language, the language of the Vedas, and how yoga has uh, been transmitted originally, the philosophies of yoga practice, there is this different quality where things are alive, or even the language itself is alive. And through that lens, it's specifically the animistic lens, and the fact that I've noticed all of these different practices from all over the world, practices, ways of living, ways of perceiving, take into account our a greater experience, a more cohesive picture. That being, there's the lower, we'll just use the Andean cosmology in the Andes and the Incas, and I'll use this as a specific reference, but all the others, as far as I've seen, have something very similar to this, if not identical. A lower world where we have our animal instincts,
Mm.
our impulses, our connection with nature is there, our biorhythms, our biology, our deepest unconscious, and our connection with ancestry too, in that place. So the things that are most unknown to us in our animal form, and then we have this middle world where we in the West we tend to think in the modern West we tend to think this is it. It's like I'm in this world and I'm identified with this world and this is it. If I can't see it or it can't be proven, perhaps scientifically,
Mm.
then there's no basis for it being reality. So
Right.
I'll just negate it or push it away. And then we have so the esoteric or the animistic way of looking at this is that we are co-creators in this world, and we are getting input from the lower world, and we're also getting input from the higher realms where we'd have our higher self.
Mm.
So for example, when we did the with your group, which is amazing, a guided visualization where we're meeting different parts of ourself in that visualization, and of course nature is also part of that visualization.
Yeah, good point.
There is a opportunity to connect with our higher self, and I really like this point of view of different timelines, and our choices in this moment in this co-creative space are playing with um, what we create in the future. And there is a highest potential. There is a fully expressed, authentic, realized version of Jeff,
Mhm.
and I can communicate with that version of me, and I can get input from that. I can get input from divine, let's say, divine wisdom, higher knowledge, and the practices like Andean cosmology have the the stars. I mean, almost all these practices look to the stars and look to deities for how they embody and manifest in this world and also from the lower world. And there's this connection here in this dimension and working with it. And so I say all this to reflect on your one. It's a beautiful, for me, adopting that point of view has given so much richness and dexterity to my way of being. And then two, when it comes back to this connection with nature, we can look at trees. Trees have been here for hundreds and some thousands of years. They are also, I mean, if not just trees that are living now, but trees go back millions of years. They are ancestors. And when we
Right.
step into the forest, and especially ancient forests, there's this tremendous um, ancestral wisdom that the
Mm.
trees are just emanating. And if
Mm.
you look at how the trees interact with each other, they are supportive of each other. We know now, we've seen it through the lens of science
Yeah.
of and understanding how trees respond as a unit, as a one, as a
Mm.
consciousness,
Mhm.
as in concert with everything else that's alive in the forest too,
Yeah.
and in whatever natural naturescape. And so the two things that are really beautiful about what you shared in your journey to get to where you are right now is one, that you have ancestry literally and human ancestry
Mhm.
in that area, and then also immediately you get called to this forest in this natural nature park
Mhm.
where you live, and it's this immediate connection with the trees. I think that's super cool that it's just seeing it from that place of how it's all coming together. And we get called, in my experience, we get called back to nature,
Yeah.
essentially.
Yeah, absolutely. Beautiful. I love I love the way you phrase things, and you mentioned, yeah, the visualization, and it's pointing out that the visualization that we had yesterday was based in a nature setting. So isn't that neat as well? We're just, again, there's all these points of connection and cohesiveness or cohesion, we'll say. Yeah,
Cohesion, yeah.
yeah, very cool, very cool. And I love the that idea of the trees having a ancestral vibe. It does. And it does sound silly. Well, it doesn't not it's not silly. It depends on who depends on
Yeah, I
who's
get you.
hearing it, right?
Yeah,
But it does. I felt
totally.
welcomed by the nature
Yes.
setting, and this idea of like mind speak to them and just going like, hey, thank you, and that sort of thing. And I wanted to share a brief story when we were talking ancestors. My mom and my brother had a trip to Norway, which is where a lot of my ancestors are from. And that trip paralleled me feeling like I'm coming back home because I'm like, I physically am. I had never lived here, but as far as just literally my grandparents and my parents, as I mentioned, lived here. So it felt like there's this like welcoming vibe ancestrally in that sense. And going to like a home location, like, oh, this is where, like, and learning, okay, this is where my grandparents had their honeymoon, right? We went and checked that out, Harrison Hot Springs, which is nearby. And I'm hearing all this, like I'm doing this, I'm like, these places that I'm drawn to, and then I'll call my mom and say, hey, I went here, and she's like, oh, that's where my dad, your dad and I used to go drinking when we were like 20 or something, you know what I mean? Just little things like that where I'm like, oh, we're staying in this hotel, and she's got a story for it. And just bringing it all together, it has this really gratifying feeling. And meanwhile, she and my brother were paralleling my journey back home in this sense, with going even deeper back into like an ancestor, like finding, the grave sites of like are my great great relatives and where they grew up, and they were kind of feeling. So it was like this energy of, she's exploring, the ancestors of like a few generations back, and I'm coming home to where it's a little more current, but it's just like it's such a um fulfilling feeling, right? It recharges me in a different way, and yeah, just tops up a lot of different elements about myself that I like about myself. The creativity is at a peak right now. Uh, just my ability to like have work-life balance is at a peak. So all these different things that it's at this time of life that I'm at, as I approach my birthdays in August, it's often very reflective for me to look back on, okay, take inventory, take stock of, where I'm professionally and personally. And I'm feeling very good about everything right now. I actually had, again, on one of these nature walks I was telling you about a couple weeks back, I said, if all things were the same, if I was, a multimillionaire, I'm essentially living the life that I would be living if like money and time was of no object right now. So, and I realize that as I'm like in between coaching calls, I'm just out in nature. You know what I mean? I'm like, this is part of my workday essentially, right? And I'm doing this, and I'm like taking care of business, and I'm out in, I'm dictating my day in such a way, um, I'm doing what I want, right? And it's just like, wow, that's what an incredible feeling to have, and to just that realization hit me, and it felt very like calming, and obviously felt very grateful in that moment.
How cool is it to consider this? And I invite the listener to consider this, and with through the lens of possibility, through the lens of being open to following the through line of this. And it would be, I'll speak for myself. If I won the lottery
Mhm.
tomorrow,
Mm,
my lifestyle wouldn't change.
right.
I love how I live.
Mm,
And it's what it is I've learned how to meet my needs as a human
mm,
being, my
mm,
spiritual needs, my psychological needs, of purpose and my biological needs for how I get rest and how I take care of myself and how I move and how I eat. And like I said, spiritual needs, connecting with nature, connecting with higher wisdom, higher power, higher intelligence, higher just all present moment stuff.
Yeah, yeah,
And that's a really cool litmus test. And
that
it's not
is.
one, I could imagine asking that and there being a potential for contraction. Well, like, oh no, I wouldn't. Um, I haven't hit the jackpot of lifestyle yet.
Right,
So there is the what. So instead of taking that into contraction, there's this opportunity for that to be a wonderful realization that okay, how can I take? And it, by the way, in my experience, it's I know plenty of people, and I know people who know people that are very wealthy and not super happy. And
sure.
we all know that we know that, but also I know people that are wealthy and very happy.
Right,
And the difference in how they live is how they take care of themselves and are they meeting their needs?
right.
And really the we can easily detach from the story about money. I think that's the core of it, Matt, is that
Yeah, yeah.
you're meeting your needs.
Hmm. Absolutely. I love that take on it. I love the and just the idea, like, and you say put it out to the listeners too. It's like it is a litmus test, isn't it? It's like, you know, and when you start into that personal journey, I think that's some of the best things that you can be asking is like, how detached are you from, how big is the gap between, you know, what you want to be doing versus what you are doing? Or are you, because for me, it was like, okay, well, I'm going to do what don't necessarily want to do under the guise that like 15 years from now, I can do whatever I want, right? That whole
Right.
retirement
Yes,
trap or whatever.
exactly.
And I was
Yeah,
just like,
totally.
no, I can't do this. Like you were talking to contraction, very much so. As soon as I would tell myself, I'd say halfway through what could have been like a 35-year career. I was 20 plus years in, and I kept saying, hey, you just got 15 more years to go. Anytime I'd suggest anything of that subject, it would just, I would feel this
Mm.
like pressure, like the walls were closing in. I was like, okay, well, this is clearly I have to change something here. So, but yeah, I love what you were saying too. It's, yeah, just the way that you summarized it was beautiful. I have a question about you. You mentioned the higher self thing. Do you have a vision of like the highest Jeff? Is it like, how does that show up for you? Is it like a sort of a blurry, or do you actually like, can you picture like, do you like right down to the clothes you're wearing? You know what I mean? Just like, does he appear older? Like, what is your higher self? How does your higher self show up for you?
I love that question. I believe that that is possibly going to evolve, and I do have this very real connection at this point where I practice from time to time looking into the eyes, and by looking to the eyes in a way, seeing into the soul or into the essence of
Mm,
that being that. And so for me, it's an older version,
mm,
and
mhm,
I get in this. On a side note, eye gazing is a really special practice.
mm.
Looking into the eyes of another human being. I'll put a pin in that. Talk more about it later
Yeah.
because it influences that particular practice of creating a connection, or what I would say, to use some words, fancy words, a quantum connection. So our
Mm,
attention, obviously, our attention isn't bound by time or space. When we get to the place of disidentifying with the material experience, with time and space produces, and for me, that's been a journey with meditation of recognizing I'll start with the breath. I can focus on my breath. So I can put my attention on my breath. And then there's this other evolution around the language and the work we do with stories is understanding that words influence our imagery, which our
Mm,
imagery is tied to memory, which is in the past.
mm,
And also we can be in this beautiful presence and start to sense what is a future potential in the energetic space. And so
yeah.
I'm saying that I hope that that's easy to ground for everyone here listening. That really it starts with attention and being able to anchor into the present moment. So it's this here I am experiencing this moment, and there's an ease or a bliss or an elevated energy to that, the quality of energy to that, what I call presence.
Mm, mhm,
Yogis in yogic philosophy, there's the one path to yoga, which we talked about a lot, is a state of being and experience. So yoga is a state of being connected with
mhm.
all.
Right.
And getting up to that, there's concentration, focus, like
Mm,
learning that we can choose how we focus. And that's then seeding us into or guiding us to meditation, which is where the boundary between self and everything starts to dissolve so that I
mm,
can have an everything experience. And then there's this samadhi, which is the bliss of that, the joy of that, because there's all these energetic pulls and in our stories and our ideas of what's right and what's wrong and our judgments that we incur that just it all dissolves. So it's a so just being free from that, like completely uh free, buoyant,
mhm,
light.
mhm.
And when I look into the eyes of my future self, I get emotional in this really beautiful way of seeing the version of me who's just he's walked the path of Jeff and he knows. And there's this great peace and great stillness in his being, and I can connect with that and I can just
Mm.
rest with that. And so that's his. It's not about go and do this, Jeff, and then you'll be actualized, do this in the world. I don't know what that he's not telling me
Right.
what that
Yeah.
is, right? It's
Right.
like it's like but
Yeah.
there will be a point where I just know,
Right.
if anything, it's living as fully, putting doing what I can and being in as alignment as I can and being in a process of cultivating this inner alignment.
Mm.
And this is then the meeting of the culmination of a lifetime of that. And
Yeah.
that's a part of me. And that's not it's not so in this quantum point of view, it's not in the future. It's now. I
Mm.
can have that now. I can
Right.
channel that right now. So
Yeah. I like that.
that's how I would reflect that to you.
Yeah. That's all. I love all of that. I love the idea of like the quantum reality or the whole idea that you can through meditation or visualization, which there's a lot of overlap between the two perhaps,
Mm,
where you can tap into um, a different side of yourself, or as they say, even like a different quantum reality, like this reality jumping, where it's like of all the infinite realities, or just how vast the rest of the galaxy is, there's a very good chance that a different version of Matt and Jeff are having a different or slightly different conversation, right? And it's at the exact same time somewhere else, and or yeah, I'm fascinated by that whole idea. I really like the what you were saying, that I view it as, and correct me if I'm wrong, it's more of like an intangible quality that you have, or the intangible qualities is like the what you can tap into with your higher self, as far as, and it what really stuck out to me is because I feel that same way, like a calmness. There's just like a certainty
mm.
and a centeredness
Yes.
of like, okay, like that I desire, and I imagine I'm heading that direction, and that is what I'm like, okay, I've seen this, like, yeah, like you mentioned, like something you can tap into, and it's like this feeling of, yeah, just certainty, right? I forget exactly what word you used, but I'm like, okay, that seems very similar to the way that I look at it, as well. I also happen to, and like you said, it changes from time to time, but I happen to have like more of a visual, and I think it's based on, um, it's kind of funny to admit, but based on a bit of presentation, like just the way I'm like dressed. I've always had again, a story perhaps, tickle perhaps. There's a story of like the older you get, the more distinguished features sort of come with it. So I'm dressed a little nicer, which is funny because I would have said the same thing of the 30-year-old version of me would say about the 40-year-old version. And here I am 40 years old and I still wear like band t-shirts and you know what I mean? Under Armour shorts, which I'm currently wearing, like I haven't really changed my presentation in that sense. So it's curious that I'm looking at my, whatever this may be, 50-year-old or 55-year-old version of myself, and he's wearing a suit just because I'm like, I've always thought, older men specifically wear suits. I'm not really sure where that comes from, but I find it somewhat humorous. And I'm also like, oh man, looking like a sharp dressed man there. And then meanwhile in my head going, I don't like wearing suits. So I don't know what this higher
Right.
self, why is this higher self wearing a suit right now? It's just, it's, I guess more playful than anything at that point, but
I think it's interesting, Matt. I would go buy a fucking great suit, man. And I would,
yeah,
and so I'm just thinking about that because there's
yeah,
information in that.
hmm,
And
interesting.
I would entertain what are the edges of, because there is something archetypal to,
Hmm.
and I would say in more recent conscious collective consciousness to presentation
Mm,
and to the out. So it's this outside mirroring the inside,
mm,
and it's not that it's a one way street. I've gone through the route of attuning to the inside and seeing how that wants to
mhm,
express outwardly, but it also goes the other way because you
mm.
can affect change on the inside by changing the
Sure.
outside. And
It's a
it's
good
there's
point.
this, it is like that, the very much like we talked about the power of being willing to experience something differently or
Mm,
different.
mhm.
And it's give I would I mean I'm interested on your behalf, and you don't have, yeah, I mean,
Yeah,
like I'm
sure.
not interested, but it's
Yeah,
like what would
yeah.
it look and feel like to
Mm,
play with the perhaps there's edges even of looking really really good, like
right, right.
I want to look good, and then there's that, okay, not how anybody else looks good, but I like,
Mm,
because taste and sophistication from that, it's a very human thing, right? It's a very human
sure.
thing.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Is, and for that to be distinguished means it's refined.
Mm. Hmm,
So I
I
find
like
that,
that.
I mean, I just think that's interesting.
Yeah, that is. Yeah. And it's funny. It's like I say it with almost a veil of like embarrassment to admit that. At the same token, I think in that same kind of energy, the I guess this, every topic being two topics, the other side of that is there's a playful energy to that, right? There's an innocence, just
Yeah,
let's try this on. Let's there.
like Mark England, a lifted head coach, and Mark
Yes.
England in tracksuits. The
Right.
man's
Yeah.
obsessed. He basically
Yeah.
started a tracksuit cult. I mean,
Yeah.
I didn't want a tracksuit, but I just
Yeah.
know, and I say that with, a sense of humor, and I love it. I
Yes.
love it. I love it. You're right.
You're right.
Um, but it's like, in terms of the identity work, if there's an alignment there, I think that's interesting to explore.
Absolutely. Yeah. I like that. I like that topic for sure.
I can see you with a monocle.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, yeah. Absolutely. Yeah, now we're talking pocket watch, monocle. We got to do the whole thing,
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
right?
mm-hmm.
I'm curious what because we touched on money a little bit, just the lottery and just if things are the same and abundance of wealth and such. What would you say is your current view of money as far as, what is it? Like, is it an energetic thing? Is it because it is kind of it's a complex, fairly nuanced subject, isn't it? Money, like what would you say your money story is, and if it isn't necessarily story, like yeah, what's your take on it? What is your vision? Or I guess not vision either. You get what I mean though. Like, what is your yeah? What is your take on money these days? Your in present Jeff.
Yeah, it's it's something I consider. Now, I've just recently gotten married, and
Yeah,
my wife was in living in California, and she came to live with me in Portugal.
amazing.
And there is this again, I was so close to using the word reality
Mm,
of a like right now in a role of providership and a role of money is a resource to facilitate a way of life, right? To
got it.
facilitate.
Yeah, yeah,
So in that way, I can say it's energetic, right?
right.
And well, before I want to drop the name of a book, actually a couple of books right
Mm,
now.
mm-hmm.
Uh, well, one is in my mind. Two has nothing to do with money, but everything to do with this conversation. The first one is
Yes.
about trees. It's fiction. It's really good. It's called The Over Story.
Okay.
I have it. No, I don't see it right now, but it might be in this room somewhere.
Yeah.
And the other is called Braiding Sweetgrass.
Mm,
And
okay.
both Braiding Sweetgrass is more of a going on a journey with the narrator, who's the author, integrating indigenous ways back into her very like scientific point of view, because
Okay.
she's Native American
Cool.
heritage, and she grew up with the waves, and then became a scientist, a biologist, I believe, and then really went back and looked at how people interacted with nature that was so different than how we interact. So
Hmm.
in a way, money is this. It's like this. It's a degree of abstraction from the way we used to be in communion with nature. I think. I mean, I'm entertaining the possibility of money conceptually as being a disconnection from the
Mm,
way that from an indigenous point of view, or more natural way of living would have been in communion with nature, and what would have been in place was the law of reciprocity.
mm.
And the law of reciprocity, another book. You would have read this, Ishmael, right? Ishmael, Mark England would have. Did he suggest that at one point?
Not that one. I know he cycles through a few different ones. That one I have uh
That
not
one's
listened
really
to or
good
read.
too,
Ishmael. Okay, cool.
because I will get to and unpack more of my point of view on money, like as it
Yeah.
relates to my day to day.
Yes.
And the reason I'm pulling from these books is because I think about it. I really am interested and feeling into the what is in my alignment with what
Mm,
feels like in alignment with me. And so in this, to play in this world culturally, money is a part of it,
right.
really.
Yep.
And there are pockets where it's not, but very few,
Mm, hmm.
where people are living more communally. But there's hybrids between being very capitalistic or commercial, and then the people that are living and just living off the land somewhere where they probably don't want you to know where they're living because they're
Yeah.
happy.
Yeah. Right.
uh,
Yeah.
so in the Ishmael books written by Daniel Quinn,
Hmm.
highly recommend reading it and or getting the audiobook, especially the first one. Um, there's this question of how did we get here, as in we're here, humans, you and I, and we're living in a system, or we're living in this way. And so it's a what the book does is a really beautiful way of dissecting through really good inquiry, and also looking at the history that we know, or the history that's written, of how we got to where we are, and the thing that we are in, which is like, we are, the metaphor would be, take a fish inside the water and try and tell the fish about the water. So metaphorically, the fish would be like, what are you talking about? And the
Yeah.
fish is so, it's like us in gravity. How often do we think consciously about, oh yeah, gravity, oh shit,
Right.
I remember today I'm going to be stuck to the ground all day because, oh yeah, gravity. So
Right.
it's like telling a fish, about water. So it's this thing in our psyche. So another way of saying that is it's unconscious, right?
Mm.
And
Right.
and Ishmael particularly unpacks this idea of mother culture. So how did culture evolve? And we're all swimming in the pool of culture and these
Mm.
collective beliefs. And Carl Jung did a lot of looking at this too, um, from the times of ancient Greece. Before that, when we were starting our journey as an agrarian, living off the land but in one place, what happened between living off the land and being hunter gatherer and nomadic and moving
Yeah.
around,
Yeah.
and then being in one place and living off the land, and then now we're not really, I mean, for the last 150 years, the most of us are disconnected from the land and how we get our needs met at the,
Hmm.
like, eating level, right? So there's
Right.
this interesting focal point of what happened. And again, we're working with the the history that's written. What happened between going from being nomadic hunter gatherers and having our needs met from the land, to then wanting to be in one place and have food there and grow it, and then eventually something, it became more predictable.
Hmm.
So there's this interesting thing where it's like utterly reliant and trusting the land to provide,
Mm.
to, I don't trust you so much, I'm going to take care of it myself.
Right.
And yeah, I still know how the land works and nature works, and I can manipulate it to my needs, but I feel safer that way.
Right. Right.
And then, and so what happened when now land is going from this space that is completely communal, and of course there's tribal aspects to that, but there's another, the book unpacks that a little bit more too. This land is valuable and it's mine, and you know what, I have more people to feed, I'm going to take that land too because nobody's currently claiming it, and then, oh, if you want to come on it, I'll fight you for it and I'll take
Right.
that land too. So it just starts to spread.
Right.
And then a very interesting thing happened that shifted everything. I know I'm talking about food, but it was the currency before
Mm.
money,
Hmm.
really.
Right. Yeah. Good point.
It went under lock and key, as in, then there had to be a transaction to get food
Right. Okay.
at some point. So then we started to create currencies, right? So currency for this, and then a currency then could, we would be bartering and things like that. So
Yeah. Yeah.
there's this interesting, I think about it, and I'm very interested in it because I want what's going to create the most freedom and harmony in our world. And I want to
Hmm.
be for that. I want to already start living that. So how I've chosen to do that is I spend my money where my mouth is. In other words,
Mm.
what feels in alignment with me.
Mm.
I feel uncomfortable buying particularly commercial things, and particularly um, body care products that I know are just a waste of money, because I
Mm.
know if I'm putting good food into me,
Mm.
and nourishing myself in other ways. And so many body care, like I haven't washed my hair with shampoo in I don't know how many years.
Yeah.
I rarely use deodorant. Maybe sometimes I use deodorant, but I'll use like a natural deodorant. Um, Even toothpaste. Like there's just so many. I do brush my teeth, but like, you can make natural things.
Right.
And there's just, I care about that, giving my money, which is then a projection outwardly of my attention, my energy into that system. So that's
Yeah.
one way I really relate to money as I mean, this is how I'm voting. This is where I'm for this. So I'll spend this. So that's me being very conscious about choosing that money is putting energy towards
Mm.
manifesting in this reality, which things can happen slower. It's the material plane. So in the quantum imaginal plane, it can just happen instantly. But for it to materialize, it just requires more energy.
Right.
So um, it's an interesting place. So I mean, I want to then go back to the money of in business. I have my own business, and of course I want to grow that. I want to feel like it's an interesting one because I catch myself. I've never had to honestly worry for money. If I really look at it, I've always had money when I needed it.
Right.
But then there's that anxiety. If you watched Inside Out too, that's just like at the keyboard in the mind, anxiety is like, oh, but what if we run out of money, right? Like,
Hmm.
what if the carpet gets swept out from underneath me,
Yeah. Yeah.
or it's the what if worst case scenario. So
Totally.
money comes into that. So we would call that more like a scarcity belief, that it won't work out, right? So I catch that. I mean, I still have that in some cases operating in my unconscious. So
Right.
I work towards, and it's been somewhat amplified in having another person who's currently dependent, but working towards being, we're creating more abundance with each other.
Right.
But it's like that. It's if I look at my experience says only abundance. I'll be taken care of, and the money will come. But I've got to be sophisticated about that. And that means meeting my edges about if I feel some kind of edge of asking for compensation, because I am in this space, you're in this space too, where it's not like you go and pay $1.50 for a soda or a thing that
Hmm.
has a material cost that there's just agreed transaction. We're giving an energetic exchange. We're holding space. We're sharing countless hours of practice and learning and embodying, and
Hmm.
we're sharing that with our, whether it's yoga students or clients and the sobriety or coaching clients, etc.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's about really the difference between Tony Robbins, for example, who was brought up last night, who's
Yeah.
supposedly $1 million for an hour of coaching or something like that. He's
Right.
just accumulated that energetic, I'll just say like energetic force field or whatever,
Hmm.
that he's called it. He's saying this is what my time is worth.
Right.
So it is that there is again another example here, an argument of not argument, illustration of the balancing of the worlds here.
Hmm.
What are my material needs? How do I create value in this world? What is my purpose? Where's the connection point here? Because if I just want to be happy, it takes very little.
Right. Right. Yeah. It's very interesting topic overall, isn't it? Like, I mean, just the fact that you're able to go into all these different, and like the almost the origin of like what money, how money came to be from a bartering system, and like the original is like food, and and then everything else that gets factored in, right? Like you say, it's such a unique unto itself topic, that being money, right? And it's just like so many subtopics or stories that attach itself to that, and everybody has a
Absolutely.
different perception, or there's a different shade or nuance to everybody's, experience with it in a lot of ways. It being money.
And I think there's a different material appetite from
Sure.
person to person. Like what,
Right.
and so I don't necessarily, there's some wiggle room, and I also pay attention to my own stories and how I might judge and make something wrong.
Hmm.
But I would catch myself thinking about the person who's flying in a private jet. You know what I mean? And
Right.
the way I reckon that is, instead of making it wrong, which is also what I'm very attentive to. I want to remove as much judgment from this consciousness as possible, and that's making things wrong.
Hmm.
And so I should see that, and I go, well, that's the yogis would use the point of view of karma. That's that person's karma, and that doesn't
Right.
mean that they're happier or more fulfilled or more on purpose, even though we've certainly created the stories around that.
Yeah. 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 Absolutely. Yeah. Interesting stuff, man. We bounced from from
Trees to
nature.
money.
Trees. Yeah, exactly. So I was gonna say there is a connection point there if you really want to get into it. Trees to money, and then it's in between there. There's some higher self talk, and yeah, just moving. And by the way, congratulations on the recent marriage as well. I was pretty happy to see that. Very
Thank
happy for
you.
you guys, and that's amazing. Very exciting. How does this will be my final question. We'll bring this in for a landing here. How has that changed? You mentioned a little bit, you alluded to a little bit. How has that changed your mentality, your mindset, being in a relationship that has gone to the next level, and there is some
Yeah.
social pressures potentially, right? There's a lot of stories around married life, right? Sometimes there's, I mean, some elements of it feel outdated. At the end of the day, I'm sure it's about the way that you guys have an agreement together, but there's a lot of you know, um, extra shades that come along with the word marriage, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And put that in the blender with social media and cultivating some kind of perception.
Hmm.
Keeping up with the Joneses
Yep.
it's classic. Before there was Instagram and keeping up with the Joneses and everybody else through the lens of Instagram, you just looked over at your neighbor and saw what kind of car they had, and then you had to have that if it was a better car, something like this, right?
Right.
Um, the beautiful part is what to me relationship is. In case you hadn't noticed, I am very much here to grow and to evolve and to learn, and relationship is the cauldron for
Mm.
that. It
Mm.
really is.
Hmm.
And so I've been so blessed with a partner who can meet me there and desires to grow and desires to co-create life together. And I love that. And I my perception of love, it certainly, looking at this through what is conditional love or transactional love, and then
Hmm.
what is unconditional love.
Hmm.
And I've chosen to spend my life with this soul in this lifetime. I'm For those of you, I always think about somebody who might hear me say that and they're like, "What is he talking about?" Yeah, so I'm operating from this point of view that we're making choices in this life, and to be in a union that says, essentially, an agreement that we're going to be together through it all, is a very powerful declaration. It's a very powerful spell, right? And
Right.
sometimes, I mean, people are still trying to undo spells from even past lifetimes with other people,
Mm.
but that's
Hmm.
another story. That's
Yeah.
another for another time. So uh, I'll sum it up by saying it is a it's a beautiful experience that I'm choosing, and I really am in it for what we create together. And the joy that it has brought me, the joy that it has brought me, because I was very happy by myself, and
Right.
I was mostly single throughout my 20s, and haven't had many long relationships because I just I enjoy know how to enjoy life, and
Hmm.
I never needed another person for doing that. So I'm not there is that to be said that
Hmm.
this Ruby, my wife, isn't we're both in this boat where we're seeing that we can make each other's lives just a little bit better than we could do it on our own, and
Yeah.
that little bit is the most significant bit
Mm.
in our experience. So
Hmm. Love that, man. Congrats to you and to Ruby. The
thank you. Yeah,
I,
thank you. I
I'm
love her so much.
That's awesome. So shout out to her. I liken it to,
Yeah.
the first thing that comes to mind is like, when you charge a phone battery, I forget it's a lithium ion battery.
Right.
It's, the first 80 or 90% goes very quickly. And then that last 10%, it takes a lot longer. So I don't know if it's like there's some kind of mathing involved there where it's
I
like,
love
your
that.
life was very much, it was good and you were able to get up to that 90%, no problem. And then there's just that extra 10%, but goddamn, that's a good 10%, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. That
Yeah.
10% is worth it.
Yeah, absolutely, man. And yeah, thank you for coming on and collaborating and creating with me today. Always a pleasure having you
Yeah.
on here. Where can folks find you if they're looking for you online? Some of your offerings and just what's the easiest way to follow you as far as social media account? Where are you most active?
On Instagram, I'm most active at JEFE_AF. That JEFE pronounced Jefe because it's a Spanish word for leader, FAAF. And yeah, I've said this story before, but it's around
Yep.
leading authentically. And then
Yes.
I'm currently orienting my message to reach yoga teachers, wellness practitioners, even those considering to step into that quality of leadership where you are sharing your gifts, your what you have found to be healing for you
Hmm.
with the world. I want to support leaders in that way. To me, that's yoga is all of that. And
Yeah.
so hefeliving.com is my website, but you can really keep up to date with me well on Instagram at hefe_AF.
Awesome. Jeff, thank you so much for
Thank you,
coming on
brother.
today. Been appreciative of the last 3 days we did it. Whenever we
Yeah,
collaborate,
we
it turns
did.
into an epic space. So we had so Sunday, at time recording today's Tuesday. So Sunday we did a conjoined group call with yours and the sober group that I helped facilitate. We did a yin yoga breath work, which you ran. So thank you for that. You came on and we did a co-facilitation group called the sobriety group last night, where you did a guided visualization for everybody. I did the celebrating of the wins at the beginning. And then to wrap it all up in a wonderful conversation of a podcast here today. So awesome, brother. I appreciate you. I love you. Thank you so much for coming on today.
And my pleasure. It's always fun. Let's keep going.
Absolutely. Thanks, Jeff.